So a few months ago I did a big top 100 of my favourite games of all time, and you know what, that actually went quite well. So I've kind of decided, you know, people like that, let's make some more of them, especially seeing as it's the summer months and, you know, things are kind of chilled, you know, you're kind of interested in going out a lot, at least when the weather's nice, as opposed to, you know, sitting in and doing documentaries for hours. You kind of just want to chill down and play some games in this time. So I've played quite a few games, specifically games from my favourite console of all time, the Mega Drive. Because I thought, you know, why not make some nice platform-specific top 100 videos? So what I have here is 100 of my favourite Mega Drive games that I've kind of put in a rough sort of order. I mean, if you kind of compare it to the order of the Mega Drive games in the top 100 list of all time that I did, maybe they won't quite match up, but all I can say is, you know, this is how I felt at the time when I made the top 100 up. So without me waffling along too much, let's just get on with it. 100 awesome Mega Drive games. Maybe you'll be able to play some of these on that Mega Drive Mini that's coming out soon. Just a thought. Anyway, let's go. So we're kicking things off here with Fantastic Dizzy from Codemasters. Fantastic Dizzy for me is my favourite Dizzy game. It's kind of a it's like a compilation almost of all the really good things about the series, whether it's like the puzzle stuff, the you know, the unique movement of the egg and all sorts of that. It's kind of a long slog as well. I mean, there's about, what, 200 stars I think it is that you need to get, but even though it's kind of long and really in that sort of European platformer vein, I really enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot more, I have to say, than quite a lot of the other European platformers, you know, your things like Zool or Super Frog, even though that's not on the Mega Drive. I love Fantastic Dizzy. It is like a love letter to the series, still done by, you know, the people who made Dizzy what it is, and it's a really enjoyable game. And we're actually sticking with Codemasters for number 99, Brian Lara Cricket, 1996. One of the very few, to be honest, cricket games out there, but always the cricket game that, if I ever think of cricket games, is the first one that comes to mind. I mean, my girlfriend's always saying, oh, you should make a video about cricket games, and yet this is the only one I can really think of. Maybe because a lot of the other ones that I've played are kind of bad. This one is actually quite playable, even if you don't really get the game. I mean, there's a ball coming to you, you just hit it. It's kind of got a little bit of like simple sensibilities about it without being too involved in all the intricacies of cricket. It's kind of fun to just pick up and play, as opposed to a lot of other cricket style games. It's a good one, and I've played it quite a lot back in the day. Number 98, a one that more people I'm sure will be familiar with, Altered Beast, one of the first games ever released for the Mega Drive, the first pack and title. It's Altered Beast. It's not necessarily the best game. It's a pretty simple arcade side-scroller, punch them, kick them in the ghoulies, and then get all the orbs and transform yourself into a beast. Pretty simple, but pretty good arcade version. Nice little early showcase of what the Mega Drive could do compared to the 8-bit platforms. Short game, average game, but one that still holds a lot of nostalgia for anyone who's a big Mega Drive fan. It kind of had to have a place in this top 100, even if it is only number 98. Up next we have Wimbledon, one of 2 tennis games on the list. I was actually able to find 2 tennis games that I really enjoy. Wimbledon of the 2 is the more simulation style one. It has probably better controls than the other game, which I'll just say for now is Pga Sampras Tennis. But it's got some really nice presentation. It's a Sega in-house title, Sega Sports, and does play quite well for a tennis game. You can kind of go quite in depth on the difficulty options. It's got a cool singles mode, a much better singles mode than the first game, but the doubles mode isn't necessarily as hot. But I'll get to that when I get to Pga Sampras Tennis later on. It's a jolly good game, and they're both good enough so that I could have 2 tennis games on this. But then Sega are quite good at tennis, Virtua Tennis and all that. So yeah, Wimbledon shouldn't come as a surprise. Number 96, General Chaos. General Chaos is a weird game. General Chaos is a game, almost when you play it, you almost have no idea what you're actually doing when you're playing the game. It is so, well, chaotic, as the title might suggest. You just flicking the D-pad all around and trying to put your guys into some sort of position where they'll actually be able to properly kill the other members of the opposing team. All of a sudden things stop and you have a big old tussle between two of them. People get blown up. You kind of think, oh, maybe I should try and get the actual collectibles, do some of the bonus objectives that are available to you on certain stages. It is a pretty crazy game, but the presentation is awesome besides that, even though, you know, it's not exactly the deepest of strategy games. I mean, that's for damn sure. It is quite a fun one. It's simplistic enough that my mind can actually get around it, while also being chaotic enough that it kind of surprises you sometimes and makes you think, holy shit, did that actually just happen? It's a good one. Altogether more relaxing, number 95, Pga Tour Golf 3. I like a nice little golf game every now and again. It's nice to kind of just chill out and just, you know, hit a ball virtually around some course. I mean, I can certainly play golf a hell of a lot better in computer form than I can do in real life. I cannot play it at all. This is just a very chilled out game. It always has been since the first time that I picked this one up back in, what, 1994 I think it was that I must have first played this. I think that was when it came out. It's just nice. It's relaxing. Not the greatest golf game ever made, but you know something? Not bad either. 94. We've got a Gley Lancer, or to give it its full title, Advanced Buster Hawk Gley Lancer. This is a Japanese exclusive, as it was at the time. You can find a translation of it though if you really want to get into the story of the game. But if you don't want to, well, it's a perfectly cool shooter. It's kind of different from a lot of side-scrolling shooters in that you do get horizontal and vertical parts. So it's kind of important as to what sort of formation you choose at the start. Whether you want to do the roll-in formation, or you want your guys to follow you, or you want them to be more vertical. It's kind of one of those more mazy side-scrolling shooters, kind of like an R-Type, I guess. Although the vertical sort of side of it does kind of differentiate it from a lot more of the straight ahead stuff. It's got a unique little premise, it's got nice music, and it works. It really works. Works enough for it to be in the lower reaches of the list. So there you go. Number 93, another Euro platformer classic, James Pond 2. James Pond 2 is a really good Euro platformer, mainly because it doesn't do the worst thing that a lot of Euro platformers do, in that they force you to collect so much crap over the course of a level and you think, oh, you've finished. Oh no, wait a minute, I've got to go around and collect all the other little pieces of crap that are around there. I mean, sure, you have to collect penguins in James Pond 2, but usually it doesn't even that much bother with that. Usually all the penguins are just right at the end of the level. It's a really nice little game. The climbing mechanic, that sort of mechanic is kind of a bit slow and ponderous, but to be honest, most of the time when you're playing the game you don't even have to bother with it. Usually you only use it if you need to collect some bonus items or whatever. There's a bunch of nice secrets, and I think it was all pretty much the work of one guy as well, who did basically everything. It's a lovely little game. I really enjoy it. 92, True Lies. True Lies is one of those games that really seems to have gotten a level up in its reputation over the past couple of years. I mean, you try and buy a copy of this game now online, it's quite expensive, and it's actually a damn good licensed game, which is unusual for any licensed game involving Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think of games like Last Action Hero or Red Heat. I mean, one of the things that often stood out in Arnie games, from what I've heard anyway, is that he never liked to actually shoot anybody, or didn't like to be seen shooting anybody in any of the games with his likeness in it. But that all changed for True Lies, where you can just blast terrorists to your heart's content. You've got your pistol, you've got your submachine guns, you've got terrorists throwing grenades, civilians all around getting blown up, torn asunder. It's a lot of fun. It is kind of a front-loaded game in that the first 3 levels or so are really damn good, and then the rest of the game is a bit air. But True Lies is a lot of fun just to screw around with and, you know, just blast some terrorists up. It's a really cool top-down shooter in that sort of Chaos Engine type vein. Definitely recommended. Another licensed game to round off the 90s, Mcdonald's Treasureland Adventure. Now this is a game by Treasure, and some people tend to have a poor opinion of this one, and I really can't understand why. Like, you actually play the game, it's this really actually well-made platformer. I mean, sure, it's got the cringy Ronald McDonald license, but you've got fun music, you've got a cool mechanic, kind of in a similar vein to what Treasure would do a bit later on, I think, with a Dynamite Heady. It's also really damn hard as well. It's a challenging platformer. It's a fun game. I don't know why some people tend to have a problem with McDonald's Treasureland Adventure. I think it's a great title. It's one of the better licensed platforms you can find on the system. I mean, it's certainly better than the likes of Mick and Mac, let's say, if you want to compare it to other McDonald's tie-ins. I don't know, compare it to like McKids or Donaldland on the NES. I mean, it's a few levels above those. Probably the greatest McDonald's tie-in video game ever. So, you know, props for that. Number 90, Eternal Champions gets number 90. Eternal Champions is obviously a game I have a hell of a lot of nostalgia for, and I always, you know, wanted it to do well, because it was like Sega's flagship original beat-em-up, or original fighting game rather, and it was hyped up as such endlessly in magazines and all that. It never quite got that level of success, certainly not the levels of success that Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat had, and even though the premise of the game is absolutely fantastic, the gameplay itself maybe isn't the hottest. But again, it's another game kind of like Altered Beast. I couldn't not have it in the top 100 because of the memories that the game has. And again, like the premise of having all these fighters and pulling them from the last second before their death and having them take on each other so that they can actually stay alive and affect the course of the world in a positive fashion was a fantastic premise and really good stuff. If only, you know, the game had perhaps just been a little more tighter when it came to all the fighting mechanics, it would have been an absolute winner. But there you go, can't have it all. Number 89, it perhaps does not get more 90s than Skitchin. Skitchin is, I mean, when you look on the surface of it, is such a cringy game. I mean, you've got the whole alternative rock Generation X vibe, you know, you've got the whole premise, you know, you're skating down the road, you're hitching onto the back of cars and trying to beat everyone else up, everyone's got stupid haircuts. But if you remove all of that, basically what you have is a really cool Road Rash style game, only on roller skates, and there ain't nothing wrong with Road Rash, and so there really isn't much wrong with Skitchin. Once you just get past all the tood, you actually have kind of a cool little grungy soundtrack, and you have just a lot of fun bashing people up on the road. I mean, there's nothing not fun about a good racing game where you can also beat up your opponents. So Skitchin's damn good, easily on the list. Number 88, Arcus Odyssey. Arcus Odyssey is part of a big series of games that I only really have experience with this one, and I think they turned into some weird softcore porn thing by the end of it, if memory serves me right, something to do with Telnet Japan or whatever. This game itself is a very good isometric shooter, kind of almost an action RPG style thing, but definitely way more arcade than that sounds. It's solid. It is solid as a rock. You've got all sorts of different characters and they've all got very different functions. And it's just one of those games, it's one of those Wolf Team games. You have these Wolf Team games and there's a good few of them on the list. They've got solid graphics, they're not necessarily the greatest running of games, but you've usually got a fantastic soundtrack, as this game does, usually by Motoi Sakuraba, who is probably more famous for Dark Souls these days. And you just got all these really kind of unique things about it. So there's a few games by that lot on the list. Arcus Odyssey is just the first of them. Outrun 2019. It's one of those games. There's several Outrun games that, for whatever reason, don't actually have that much resemblance to Outrun. I mean, obviously you can think of the US Gold Master System titles, like there's the Outrun Europa, where you're on a motorcycle and it's basically an action game. This one has a lot more resemblance to Outrun, even if it is kind of trying to be Outrun mixed with F-Zero. You've still got all the multiple routes and all of that. The music isn't necessarily as memorable as it is in the classic Outrun titles. The game itself is one of the fastest and smoothest races you're going to find on the Mega Drive. Not all races are particularly good on the Mega Drive, just because, you know, it doesn't have that smoothness that SNES ones often do. It can be a bit claggy, but this is a really freaking good one, and I highly recommend it if you can find it. It's not usually that expensive either. A really good title if you've not checked it out. Earthworm Jim. Some people might expect this one to be a bit higher on the list, I suppose. Earthworm Jim 2 specifically is this one, as I tend to be better with it. I really like Earthworm Jim. I love the graphics generally of all of them, and I love its sort of presentation. It's one of the sort of best of that sort of early 90s lot of really like Gen X style cartoony stuff. My only trouble with Earthworm Jim is how terrible I am at both games, like really quite awful. A lot of the time when I play these games I just have no idea of what I'm doing, which kind of clouds my judgment when it comes to actually rating these titles, but I can't knock all the positive aspects about them, so there's definitely got to be some sort of place. It's definitely a game that's going to be on my team, especially, you know, when you factor in all like the cool little mini games. I mean, I really love the puppy love mini games that are in this one, just you know, for the sheer weird concepts that the game tends to throw at you. It's definitely a good one, definitely one for the list. We've got another sports title next at number 85, John Madden Football 92. Now, I'm the sort of person, I do actually really enjoy watching American football. I don't necessarily understand it, I certainly don't understand all the intricacies of it, but John Madden Football is still a really cool game just to pick up and play. Even if you know, it helps that it gives you like a little rough guide, like when you actually pick a play, like you kind of see it and thought, okay, I'm supposed to kind of do this, I can pass it here, I can run there. Obviously the plays don't necessarily always go the way you plan, but it's one of those games that's clearly involved enough that it's going to appease all like the really hardcore American football fans, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be cool for someone like me who enjoys watching American football but doesn't really understand it. It's a fun game regardless. It's, for me, the best of all the Madden games on the Mega Drive, and obviously Madden was a really big series on the Mega Drive at one point, so it'd be silly to not have one of the Madden games here, and for me, Madden 92 is always the one, although maybe a lot of that has to do with that awesome opening theme song. I don't know. Number 84, Kadosh, a conversion of a different sort of arcade game by Taito. Kadosh is one of those few arcade games that really leans into some like RPG elements, like you get leveling up, you can get herbs and all of that to heal yourself, all the sort of things that you wouldn't necessarily think you'd find in an arcade game, but it's here in Kadosh in this quite simple side-scrolling title, along with some weird enemies, like you can see the old black pudding here. Certainly don't look like any black pudding that I've eaten. It's a fun game. It's a really fun little arcader. I've always enjoyed it in the arcades itself, because it's something completely different from the usual, and I enjoy it here on the Mega Drive. A fun game to kick around with for an hour or so. Number 83, Eastwatch City Under Siege. One of those cases where you've got a conversion from the arcades that's actually a completely different game, and it's actually a ton better than the arcade original. I was never a big fan of the arcade original Eastwatch. I don't know, just something about it. I always think, well, I'd rather just play the Robocop game by Data East if I want to play something like that. But Eastwatch on the Mega Drive is a completely different, and let's face it, it's a much better game. It takes the same sort of concept, you know, you gradually become this robot, cyborg, super cop, whatever. You start out plain clothes, or you start in uniform rather, and you eventually become this beast, and it just does it in a hell of a lot better way than the rather middling arcade game did, for my money. Great little game. Number 82, we have Decap Attack. One of those great ones from Vic Tokai. This is one of those games that was actually something completely different in Japan. It was a Magical Hat Flying Turbo Adventure or something, and it was more of a cutesy platformer, whereas, you know, they completely changed the graphics for the West and make it this kooky game where you've got Chuck D. Head, a headless mascot who chucks his head at people, as you might have guessed from his name. Excellent game. Very classic sort of Vic Tokai style in that it's really fast and really slippy, almost like even slippier than a Mario game is. Fun little backgrounds though, awesome loud music. That's one thing I always kind of think of. I think of like the slippery controls in Vic Tokai games, and I always think of the music being insanely loud, like louder than most games. Those are always the weird things I think of when I think of Vic Tokai. Again, a game that has a lot of fun memories associated with, easily on the list. Final Zone. Now this is a game that is so underrated. Again, like Arcus Odyssey, this is a game by Wolf Team, so you've got the sort of weird concept. It's kind of a bit anime. You've got the cool music, Motoi Sakuraba again. This game is a much more straight-ahead arcade-style isometric shooter. You've got a sort of arena, you go around, you kill all the people, all the targets that you're supposed to hit, and then you get a boss fight at the end of each level. Very arcadey. No one really talks about this game. Like, there's a lot of other Wolf Team titles they probably talk about more than the Final Zone. I think this game is bloody brilliant. This is one of those games where I pick it up to play, I think, oh, Final Zone, I've not played that in a while, and then I pick it up and I can't put it down. Like, I just think, oh, I just want to keep going to one more level. It's very satisfying. It's got those really big explosion sounds that you often find in these Wolf Team games, and just fun playability. It's not the best technically, like, it really slows down a lot of the time. It's certainly not one that you'd want to choose to show off that fabled blast processing that the Sega Mega Drive has. But it's a bloody good game all the same. Love it. So underrated. Definitely one that if you've not played Final Zone, check it out. If you like games like, I don't know, Grenada or Gauntlet or anything like that, go check out Final Zone. It's one that will satisfy you. Maybe Gauntlet's bad, maybe like Chaos Engine. If you like Chaos Engine, go check out something like Final Zone. It's a lot of fun. In at number 80, we have Battle Golfer Yuri. Battle Golfer Yuri is a very weird Japanese-only game that's perhaps not necessarily the best game. I mean, you look at it and it's just some top-down golf game thing, but it's one game that I've always really enjoyed for its premise. It's like this weird anime golf game. Not that I usually have much love for anything anime, but it's a golf game where you can do all these sort of crazy shots. You can curl a ball around, you can set it on fire, you can manipulate it to whatever you want. The holes are all strange too. You've got ones that are shaped like a guitar, one that's shaped like a dolphin, one that's like a baseball field. There's all these strange things about it, and there's even a story mode, which unfortunately I don't think has been translated, which is even weirder. There's a Game Center CX episode all about Battle Golfer Yuri. If you want an idea of what the story mode actually entails, I recommend checking it out. It's a lot of fun, and all these things have really stuck with me over the years about this game, and it's made sure that it's never really left my mind. Even if it is kind of just a simple, average, top-down golf game like thousands of others, it has these very strange touches that makes me absolutely want to play it a lot of the time and put it on the list. So there you go. Good old Mortal Kombat 2 is next. I thought I'd go with Mortal Kombat 2 over the Mortal Kombat 1 on the Mega Drive. Mortal Kombat 1 is probably one that had the most impact for a lot of people, especially because it had all the blood and that. Mortal Kombat 2 is the one I played more, just because it had more characters, and I certainly used to get quite involved with this back in the day. I remember trying to learn every character and trying to learn, like, do all the fatalities, the babalities, the friendships, all of which are in this Mega Drive version. I think nowadays I've forgotten about 99% of that. Seriously, I play Mortal Kombat nowadays and I really need to look up the controls, because the only thing I can ever remember to do offhand is Sub-Zero's Ice Bolt, which is kind of bad when you're trying to actually win matches. Still, I have fond memories of playing this game for many hours back in the day, and it being bought for me by my mum, even though I was about 10 years old, and obviously I shouldn't have been playing Mortal Kombat 2 at all, but then a lot of us did that back in those days, didn't we? So yeah, lots of fun. Slap Fight MD at number 78. I would say this is probably, if you had a look at prices, this is probably the most expensive game in this top 100. This is seriously a game that if you want to buy it, it's a Japanese exclusive, it will set you back a couple of £100 at least. It's a cool conversion stroke update of a classic top-down shooter, a classic like early 80s, mid-80s type thing by Turrican. It also has its special arranged mode as well, with a soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro, of all people. Not necessarily his greatest soundtrack ever, but Yuzo Koshiro, you can't really go on with that, can you? It is old school, it is balls to the wall difficult, seriously one of the hardest shooters on the whole system. So it's a real challenge to even get anywhere in it, especially because it's one of those things where often if you die once, you literally are screwed because you don't have any power-ups and your ship is incredibly slow, so you literally can't avoid anything. But it's fun to try, at least try and get somewhere with, you know. It's cool. We have some football next. In fact, this is the only football game on the list, because there are others that I kind of saved for like doing like Amiga Top 100 or whatever. It's FIFA 95. FIFA 95 is definitely the FIFA that I played the most on all the Mega Drive ones. As far as like early sort of simulations of football go in that FIFA style, FIFA 95 is quite a bit of fun. It is strange in parts, like you have a shoot button that you can't actually really control the pace of your shot. You just blast it every time, so you can score these ridiculous goals from like 30 yards out a lot of the time, which is immensely satisfying, I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of times when it kind of does controlling for you. It's like, why have you just volleyed that? I didn't ask you to. Why have you just headed it? Why have you done these things? Why have you just backheeled it to nowhere? Which is kind of strange, but I don't know. There's still a nostalgic touch about FIFA 95. Again, maybe it just comes from being able to... Often you don't score, you know, scrappy goals in FIFA 95. You just end up scoring banners where, you know, you get a ball, you just rack it from 30 yards out and it hits the underside of the bar or goes, you know, straight into the top corner, and it's just like, oh, that's really satisfying. It's certainly a hell of a lot better than World Cup Italian 90. I'm sure you'll agree on that one. A good old classic at number 76, we have Columns. Columns is one of those games, I personally, you know, you almost think, what can I say about Columns? It is one of those games that it's just a fun little time waster, you know, just to try and put together as many columns as you can of 3 jewels of the same type or more. Diagonal, vertical, horizontal, you know, this game's got it all. The fun part of it is when, you know, it's going really fast and you think, oh my lord, well, you know, what the hell am I going to? And you suddenly get some random one that sets off a chain reaction that just, you know, brings it all the way back down. That's the part of Columns that can be really satisfying and kind of makes it stick out compared to, say, Tetris, where you don't really get that sort of chain reaction. You know, you've got to actually work a lot more in Tetris, whereas Columns kind of has that more chaotic, random element to it that I really appreciate. This is a game that most people would probably think, well, it's better portable, it's better on the Game Gear, but I still played the hell out of this Mega Drive version, and so did me ma. This is, I think, the only game in the top 100 that my mum enjoys as well, or used to enjoy back in the day. So, yeah, I love Columns. Number 75, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. Street Fighter 2 is probably a game that I generally associate more with the Super Nintendo. It's kind of like Street Fighter 2 I associate more with the SNES, Mortal Kombat I associate more with the Mega Drive. And yet and still, even though I had like the SNES Street Fighter 2 package with the World Warrior and all of that, I still had Special Champion Edition as well for my Mega Drive, and so I have a lot of fondness for that as well. I played them about as much. Sure, Special Champion Edition, you know, you've kind of got the really crackly voice samples is probably one thing that people think, and generally the music's perhaps not quite as good as it would be on the SNES port, but you still have all the bosses that you can play without the bat, which you couldn't quite do yet for the SNES until Hyper Fighting or whatever it was came out, Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And yeah, it's one of those games that, again, I mean, you've got all different modes. You've got like team battle modes and all of that. And, you know, it's Street Fighter 2. You get 2 people. You know, it's like, what do you prefer? Do you want to play it on the SNES? Do you want to play it on the Mega Drive? Either way, you know, you're good to go. So there's nothing stopping me playing this a whole lot. Would I necessarily recommend it to people over like the SNES, like the best of the SNES Street Fighter 2? Not necessarily, but nostalgia. That's what a lot of this list is all about. Target Earth at number 74, probably better known these days under its original Japanese title, Assault Suits Lanos. One of those games that's kind of got superseded. I mean, it certainly got superseded by Cybernator on the SNES, which is a fantastic game and is basically the direct sequel to this. But this is a side-scrolling mecha-type game. You know, you pick your weapons and you try and save Earth, basically, or save like a colony of Earthlings from alien attack. There's a whole story behind it. It's very driven in that sense. There's a narrative drive that you don't necessarily get in a lot of these side-scrolling games. It's cool. It's not as good as something like Cybernator. It's a bit more rough around the edges, but it does work for the time that you spend with it. Cool little game. Up next, Revenge of Shinobi. Now, this is one that people might have been expecting to see a bit higher, and indeed, Revenge of Shinobi is an awesome game. I suppose the only reason why it's here at number 73 is because there is a sequel that is a hell of a lot better, and so naturally that got a lot higher on the list. But that doesn't change anything about Revenge of Shinobi being one of the early awesome 16-bit games, one of those ones that really set out the Mega Drive stall, so to speak, much more than something that Altered Beast had done. This had the cracking music, it had all the action, the sort of stuff, you know, the sort of stuff that actually made the slogan "You can't do this on Nintendo" a hell of a lot more meaningful than something that Altered Beast did. So naturally it has its place in the Mega Drive's history. It's just that, you know, Shinobi 3 is a bit more memorable in my mind. But still, Revenge of Shinobi, you can't knock it back. Musha at number 72, a game that's really gotten quite famous over the years as one of the Mega Drive's best shooters. It's a compile shooter, it's top down, it's got amazing metallic music, it's fast paced, it really doesn't even look like a game that's actually from 1990. It looks like it could have been released a few years after that, like 1994 maybe is what Musha looks like. It is a game that's got quite long stages. Sometimes you might think, oh, this is getting a bit boring, but then usually it changes up, and it certainly has a nice little difficulty curve. It actually kind of starts out quite easy, but it certainly does get challenging by game's end. The soundtrack alone is enough for this one to be in the top 100, let's be honest. Number 71, Ghostbusters, another really decent licensed game. I think it must be from the same people who did like Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and stuff like that. It's an in-house Sega title. It looks nothing at all like the movie. They've all got kind of weird, like, big head looks, and sadly there's no Winston, but you can kind of choose your path, choose where you want to go. Do you want to go to someone's house? Do you want to go to the high-rise building and meet Stay Puft? All that sort of thing. It's certainly a lot better than the classic Ghostbusters game, you know, that one that was on the Master System, NES, Atari, Spectrum, all that stuff where, you know, you travel around in the Ecto-1 and, I don't know, just do whatever the hell you even do in that game. It's endlessly confusing even now. This straight-ahead platformer is certainly a lot better than that. One of the better Ghostbusters tie-in games. At number 70 we have Warsong. This again is something, this is actually a game that's better known as Langrissa, which is what it's called in Japan. It's a strategic RPG. If you like Shining Force, which, spoiler alert, will be on here later, you'll like Warsong. It's got all that sort of classic strategic elements, turn-based strategy of course. It's got a nice story to go ahead with. Noriyuki Iwadare does the music, another awesome Japanese composer. It's got a sequel as well, which I think has recently been translated, Langrissa 2, I've heard that's really good. There's also a sci-fi sort of turn-based RPG, which I'm pretty sure is by the same guy as Vixen 357. That always looks appealing. I never got around to play with it. I know that's been translated recently as well, so that people can actually play that one. But I have experience with Warsong, Langrissa, whatever the hell you want to call it. It's a damn good game. If you like strategic RPGs, play it. You'll love it. Number 69, Road Rash 2. Of course, you can't not have a Road Rash game in here. We did have Skitchin before, but this is the traditional and the best of the Road Rash games for me that appeared on the Mega Drive, the best of the three. It's Road Rash. You know, you ride your bicycle down the road. Motorbike. You ride your motorbike down the road, you grab weapons, and you generally beat the hell out of anyone who comes in your way. There's a reason why this game is probably one of the most memorable third-party games that anyone released on the Mega Drive. It just has those primal qualities about it. You ride a bike, you beat people up, you try and finish in first place. What's not to love about it? It's Road Rash 2. Quackdown, or as I like to call it, Quackdown, is a strange one again, a strange little shooter. You have a tiny little display, but you have a quite slow-paced and strategic shooter. One where you can actually take cover, or you can get yourself up to walls and avoid shots that way. You kind of have these little mini shootouts with all the enemies and set all the bombs in a certain amount of time and then just get the hell out of there. It's got some puzzly elements, it's got some cool shootout elements. The tiny display may not necessarily be that appealing to some people, but I kind of dig it. I dig something like that. I love stuff that's kind of miniaturized in general, so the look of Crackdown does appeal to me in that sense. So that's why I really dig this game, even though some people tend to not. I think it's really cool. NBA Jam Tournament Edition. Not that there's that much difference between this and the original NBA Jam, but I played both of them a lot. This is just the one that I played more, if I'm honest. It's NBA Jam, arcade basketball. All the fun commentary is here in actually not bad quality for the Mega Drive. And it's just generally fun action, you know, where you just rush up the court and try to do as ridiculous and crazy a dunk as possible. It's so simple 2-on-2 basketball. There's no one who wouldn't be able to pick this up. It's like an even better version of the classic Arch Rivals, which of course is its natural predecessor. What can you say? Superb. A game that's a lot more involved is the one at number 66, Ranger X. Now this can be a tough game to get around because you've got your mech, you've got your vehicle, you can either go in the vehicle and they've both got their own energy bars, you can make the vehicle independent, you can go up, down, left, right, there's lots of different targets that you need to get before you can finish the stage, and it can be really quite tricky at times to get your head around what you're actually supposed to do. But once you click with Ranger X, you get a really exciting action game for your Mega Drive. Very complicated, one of the more complex games of its type on the Mega Drive, but definitely worth the time it takes to actually get to grips with. Love this game. Another game that I love, and probably one that not that many people love, number 65, Beavis and Butthead. This is an interesting game on the Mega Drive. It's more of an adventure, like simple adventure type game where you have to collect the various pieces of the GWAR tickets that you've bought and have been shredded up. And just try and get them in various ways. One of them's in someone's stomach and you have to make it puked out with the usage of a dead rat. You have to kill Mr. Anderson for one of them and then chainsaw his tree. All sorts of strange stuff like that. It's certainly a lot better than the SNES Beavis and Butthead game, which was a side-scrolling platformer and was absolutely awful. If you've played that and think, well, obviously this game isn't all that hot, check it out because it's actually a completely different game. And if you like a sort of little side-scrolling platformy type adventure dealy, you might like this. Number 64, we have Battlemania Daiginju, another game by Vic Tokai. This is the game that's kind of like Forgotten Worlds in its presentation, only much more anime, much more better presentation, and tons of awesome gameplay fun to be had. This game is just a bloody good laugh. It's one of the best looking games, one of the best looking shooters you'll find on the Mega Drive. And it's just one you can have a lot of fun with it. There's also a really cool translation out there if you actually do want to bother with the plot of the whole thing. If you don't, you're just left with the shooter fun, which is damn good, I have to say. It's adorable in many ways. And up next at number 63, we have Mega Bomberman. Now, I think pretty much everyone has their own kind of version of Bomberman that they really enjoy, and this one's mine more than like the Super Nintendo ones, which I didn't have. The single-player Bomberman generally hasn't been much for me, like the whole story mode or whatever, but it's Bomberman, you know, you play this with friends, or you even play it against the computer in the battle mode, and, you know, just have fun blowing each other up. You've got, like, the little helpers in this one that you get on that you can ride. It's a cool little version of Bomberman, a nice addition to anyone's Mega Drive collection. Super Fantasy Zone in at number 62, great conversion, a Sunsoft conversion of the classic Defender-esque cute-em-up by Sega, Opa Opa and all of that. It's a great little version of the game. It's Fantasy Zone, you know. It's a classic shooter, a classic arcade shooter, got really fun bouncy music, you got a lot of nice little power-ups that you can use. It's just cute, it's better than the Fantasy Zone that's on Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf, I suppose. It's great. El Viento at number 61. This is a really quite bonkers game from Wolf Team. It's part of what is kind of unofficially known as the Ernest Evans trilogy, which obviously includes the utterly ridiculous Ernest Evans and a Mega CD game called Annette Fitatabi. This is by far the best of the three games. You play as Annette, who's a sort of witch. It's set in the 1920s. There's all sorts of eldritch monsters around. There's gangsters. There's some sort of treasure that you have to get. It is a completely ridiculous game. It has stupidly massive sprites and explosions in it. It's got that Wolf Team jankiness, but it is very endearing in many ways. And it's a bloody good game too. Awesome music. Definitely the best. I mean, it's a lot better than Ernest Evans, but even though that would be damning with faint praise, it's a pretty good game in its own right. Number 60, Toe Jam and Earl in Panic on Funkotron, the sequel to the original. The ToeJam and Earl sequel is obviously a much different game to the original. It's a side-scroller as opposed to whatever the original game was. And it kind of gets rid of a lot of stuff. You know, you don't have the presents with all their power-ups or power-downs in a lot of case. And a lot of people don't particularly like the sequel because of the changes that it makes. I personally still think that it's fun if you take it as a completely different game. It's a totally different game to the original. So rather than trying to compare it with that, if I look at ToeJam and Earl and Panic on Funkotron on its own terms, I think it's a nice little game. It's got the same sort of great little take on the 90s tune that the first game did. Still very endearing and all of that, very nicely done graphically. There's still a lot of cool little secrets to be found as well in the platform stuff. It's a great game. It's just, you know, it's different from the original game, and the original game is a lot more loved. But it stands on its own 2 feet. At number 59, we have Truxton. Truxton is, God, most people probably know this by now, it's kind of a retro meme. It's a damn difficult top-down shooter by Toaplan. I mean, the Japanese name of this is Tatsujin, which literally means expert. Has some bonkers music. It just kind of like someone like some sci-fi Mrs. Mills going mad on an organ is what I kind of think the music to this game sounds like. It has the Skull Bomb, which is perhaps one of the coolest bombs that you can find in any classic shooter. And of course, as mentioned, it's very difficult. Again, it's another one of those shoot-em-ups where there's specific times where if you die here, you're basically screwed because you're going to be too slow and not powerful enough to defeat anything that comes at you. So it takes a lot of time to learn, but it's worth doing. It's worth beating your head against the wall. At number 58, Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP2. Now this is one of those games that really has a lot of warm nostalgia for me. I mean, at the time it was one of the more advanced racers that you could get on a console, which kind of seems a bit cute to say now, but this was a game that famously had Ayrton Senna not just as a name tagged onto it. Ayrton Senna actually very much helped, like in a famous day at Sega of Japan, helped design the game, gave all his thoughts on how the game should be. Very famous because you know, he didn't want a game with his name on it to be trash. He wanted it to be the best it could be, and as a result, this is a damn fine racer. I mean, the Ayrton Senna connection alone obviously gives it a lot of nostalgic points to me because he was one of my idols growing up, and my love for F1 kind of died with him. The game itself still holds up regardless of that nostalgia though. At number 57, a very underrated licensed game, Predator 2. This is a really cool, action-packed, quite short and not exactly difficult, but very fun top-down shooter. You just got loads of enemies anyway. You've kind of got to beat them in a sort of big extended Smash TV style. You've got a load of hostages that you have to rescue before the Predator blows them up, which he tends to do so in quite graphic fashion actually for a 1992 Mega Drive game. It's a lot better than the film, which was pretty damn average, let's face it. It's a cool little licensed game, you know, much better than you'd perhaps think. Certainly better than the computer Predator 2 game, which was this really rubbish shooter, like rail shooter. It was awful, but this is actually a decent one. Number 56, Mickey Mania. Mickey Mania was an interesting one because previously, obviously, we have the Illusion games, Castle of Illusion and World of Illusion, both of which are coming up, and they were great. And then all of a sudden, you know, you've got Traveller's Tales doing it, and it becomes just more of a third-party game rather than Mickey Mouse being a very much Sega thing at first in the first couple of years of the system. Mickey Mania is a great tribute to the sort of classic eras of Mickey Mouse. All the levels are based off cartoons and that. They're based off, you know, Steamboat Willie, the Mad Doctor, all that sort of thing. And that comes across really well, that sort of tribute thing, you know, having levels like based on, you know, the Prince on the Pauper and all of that, and going through the years of Mickey Mouse. That comes across great. The gameplay's really nice. Even if it's one of those games, whether you like Mickey Mouse or don't, it's a good one to have. Number 55, Gemfire, also known as Royal Blood. This is a game that I'm not sure if that many people know. It's a game by Koei, who are a studio that I have quite a big soft spot for when it comes to their Mega Drive stuff, and we'll see more of their stuff later on. It's a fantasy strategy game, turn-based strategy game, not the sort of big strategy, sort of massive battles that you have in something like Romance of the Three Kingdoms or the Genghis Khan games or Liberty of Death or whatever. It's kind of more, I wouldn't say arcadey, but certainly a lot more faster paced, and there's a lot more chances when you play something like Gemfire to actually sort of snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, as long as you can kind of get someone to the end of the screen. So there's a lot of kind of different things at play. Not many people really know this game at all, but I personally think it's awesome. Definitely worth checking out. Pete Sampras Tennis, the other tennis game on the list. Why is this one better than Wimbledon? It is kind of, perhaps it's not as good looking a game as Wimbledon, it's a bit jankier perhaps. I'll tell you why this beats Wimbledon, because the double modes on this, the doubles mode rather, is fantastic. I always loved playing the doubles mode on this and going through stupidly long rallies that you could get. You could really just spend minutes like just attacking each other. You can't really do that on Wimbledon. There's some other weird stuff here that's kind of useful. There's a big huge tour mode, which is obviously kind of something that didn't quite get emulated properly, which is why they kind of put it under a cheat code. But there's also the crazy tennis, where you have lots of power-ups and power downs, and you smash Dizzy when he's walking along the net cord. There's a lot of fun to be had there. So I have a big soft spot for Pete Sampras Tennis, one of my favourite games by Codemasters. Good Old Flicky is at number 53, an arcade classic. Not one that was particularly famous back when it was released, and it certainly wasn't that famous when it was re-released on the Mega Drive. People kind of think, what is this game doing on the Mega Drive? It was already, I think, about 7 years old by the point it was actually released on the Mega Drive. But it's such a fun arcade game. You play as Flicky, you try and catch all the birds, try and catch as many you can, get them all in a neat little line and take them to the exit. It's fast, it's slippery, you can do lots of fun, and it's just so impulsive and addictive to play. Like, this is one of those games that I constantly keep bashing my head against the wall, thinking I actually really want to finish it this time, and I haven't managed to quite get around to that again because it's quite tricky. Great game. Much better. Didn't get any love, if I remember, back when it was released, but it's brilliant. People were just kind of more clueless back then, I suppose. 52, we have Batman. This Batman game by Sunsoft, probably not as perhaps memorable as, say, the 8-bit Batman games that they released, the NES one. Perhaps UK people would probably even remember the Amiga game more than this. But this is a brilliant side-scroller. It's probably better than both of those. It's got all the sort of classic things, that you find in these sort of early-ish 16-bit games, your Revenge of Shinobis, your Eastwatch and all that. Batman is kind of right in the same league. It's Sunsoft, so you also have some pretty high-quality presentations, some awesome music, as is basically always the case with Sunsoft games back in this era. Their Sunsoft 16-bit work wasn't necessarily as good as their 8-bit work. Their 8-bit work is generally a lot more iconic, but this is definitely one of the better games they released for the Mega Drive. At number 51, we have Elemental Master. This has kind of slowly risen up to become generally regarded as one of the best shooters on the system. Again, as with a lot of the shooter games, the soundtrack, this kind of soundtrack has more of a prog rock feel. It almost feels like it could have been done by a Rick Craigman. And I suppose technically some people might think, well, it's more of a run and gunner than a shooter. You have some cool power-ups. You've got like mirror power-ups. You can kind of shoot up and down. It is just solid as a damn rock. It really is. I love it. Number 50, Shadow Dancer, The Secret of Shinobi. As we had Eastwatch quite a while ago now, we start the top 50 with Shadow Dancer, and it's a similar story. The arcade Shadow Dancer it's not a bad game, it's a pretty good game. This Mega Drive version, though, is completely different and indeed better. It still retains similar qualities of the arcade game, much like the arcade game, you only die in one hit here. But it kind of just all feels a bit better implemented here in this conversion. And obviously you've got the other things, you've got your dog you can use to bite the hell out of enemies and then kill them. You've got cool bosses and that. It's a good game, and for me it just has that bit more memorable quality, I suppose, compared to Revenge of Shinobi. Even though they are kind of different games, I would end up placing this one higher. That's such the way of things. Maybe next time Revenge of Shinobi might be higher on this list. Number 49, Thunder Force 4, also kind of stupidly known as Lightning Force if you're in America. Thunder Force 4 is, I suppose, for a lot of people, the pinnacle of shoot-em-ups on the Mega Drive. Personally, I think there's a few better, but that doesn't stop Thunder Force 4 being one of the best ones. I mean, certainly it takes the graphics and that into overdrive. It's certainly a very challenging game, as a good shoot-em-up kind of really should be. The crazy guitar hard rock music is right out there. It's pretty much everything that the Thunder Force 3 was, but just everything is bigger and better. And the samples, the voice samples, are still kind of bad, but other than that, the game is pretty damn flawless. I think kind of the only reason why I tend to put a few other shoot-em-ups ahead of this is because I'm better at those shoot-em-ups than I am at this one. I'm really not that good at any of the Thunder Force games, actually, but especially not Thunder Force 4. Fantastic game, though, no doubt about it. Dick Tracy at number 48 is undoubtedly one of the best licensed games that you'll find on the system. It is, I mean, it's so much better than the other Dick Tracy games, it's not even funny. I mean, there's the NES game, that's terrible. There's the Titus computer game, which is one of the worst games ever. And then there's this superb side-scroller. Probably the main thing that most people remember about this is that, of course, you've got the enemies like coming at you in sort of regular side-scrolling form, but then you've also got the enemies in the background that you shoot with your machine gun. And there's also loads of sort of things in the background. There's windows to be smashed, fire hydrants to be exploded, just, you know, through using the old Tommy gun and just blowing crap up. It is so much fun. It is just really, like, so much better than any of the other Dick Tracy games that I can even think of. It's completely different league. Great game. So worth checking out. Castle of Illusion at number 47. I think for many people, especially those who got into the Mega Drive early on, Castle of Illusion was vindication. I think a lot of people would describe it as. Like, people would kind of wonder, you know, what's so special about the 16-bit system here as opposed to, you know, my NES or whatever. Especially maybe if they'd looked at, you know, Altered Beast or whatever, maybe thought, oh, well, it's cool, but it's only Altered Beast, it's not that impressive. And then something like Castle of Illusion comes out, and it's like, again, this is a game that you can't really do this on the 8-bits. It's so much better than that. It's all, you know, and the presentation is obviously a different level and all of that lot. So I think, yeah, Castle of Illusion along with Revenge of Shinobi, I suppose, as well. Those were the two big titles that really set the Mega Drive out as, okay, this is actually a big proper advancement. It's not just all flash and, you know, all style, no substance. So for that, it obviously deserves a place on the list. Super Hang-On at number 46. The Master System started with a conversion of Hang-On, so naturally Super Hang-On was always going to be one of the first games out for the Mega Drive. You'll probably know and love this game. You'll almost certainly love the soundtrack for this game with its big extended songs and so forth. It's a great little ride, you know. You have the motorbike, you ride it on various courses, you pick one of the songs. Outrider Crisis is probably my favourite, although I have a soft spot for Winning Run as well, which doesn't seem to get as much love as the other three songs, but I really like that one. It's got a great little solo and everything, that proper, you know, Sega Sound Team music. You've even got the original mode here, where you can actually level up your bike and take on rivals and try and beat them one by one, which certainly adds a lot more to the game than it just being a flat-out arcade conversion of Super Hang-On. So, you know, that's very much welcome. Great little conversion, what else can you say? Shining Force at number 45, one of our first proper RPGs, I suppose, that have come on this list. Although, again, this is kind of a strategy RPG, although, unlike Warsong, it's much more perhaps RPG than strategy. But the turn-based strategy element of this one is very strong. The story itself is super strong as well. I always like the little, you know, sort of intervals and like the presentation it has in the battle. Maybe some people might think it's a bit slow on that front, but I dig it myself. Yeah, I mean, it's Shining Force. Shining Force isn't necessarily my favourite RPG on the Mega Drive. There's certainly going to be a couple of others that beat it, but it's a good one. Space Harrier 2, number 44, the first game on the system. Space Harrier 2 never used to be something that got that much love. I mean, I guess people thought that, well, you know, even though it's a cool version of Space Harrier and it kind of moves fast, it's still perhaps a bit janky compared to the arcade original. I love this game. This is one of those games that whenever I play Space Harrier 2, I have to beat it. I just always have to go and beat it, and usually 9 times out of 10 I do beat it just because I've played this game so much. This is, again, it's one of those Mega Drive games where it only lasts about 20 minutes or so, 25 tops. It's kind of fixed in its length, to be honest, and so it's a nice little thing to do. It's like, I'm bored, I'll play Space Harrier 2. You know how I kind of used to say that with World Cup Italia 90? Well, Space Harrier 2 is a similar case, but the game is a hell of a lot better. So, massive love to the game. Brilliant. Robocop versus the Terminator. This game is a bloodfest. My lord, this is probably the most violent game of all the stuff on the list. Seriously, you know, every enemy dies in just a hail of blood, guts and viscera. It's kind of ludicrous in that regard, but the game itself is one of the more fun Robocop games out there. Obviously you've got the Terminator side as well, but you've also got, you know, the appearance of all your kind of Robocop favourites. You know, there's a big OCP element, there's Ed 209, there's Kane from Robocop 2, and nothing at all from Robocop 3, which is as it should be. And then of course you've got the Terminator side of things. You know, you've got the post-apocalyptia, you've got Skynet, all that good stuff. So it's great for fans of both Robocop and the Terminator, either or, and a cool little shooter in the bargain. Number 42, Golden Axe, another iconic Sega game, one that I think pretty much anyone who's ever had the system has played. Either they've played it on the original cartridge, or more than likely they've played it on Mega Games 2, which I believe it is on. It's Golden Axe. This Mega Drive conversion was pretty solid compared to the arcade that it came from, along with also having some extra little bits as well. You know, the dual mode is extra, and you've got the little add-on to the arcade mode as well, where you actually face Death Brenner and his immortal skeletons, and it's a pretty damn tough fight. Again, like Space Harrier 2, this is one of those games where if I put it on, I have to beat it. I have to try and beat it at least. I will play it until I either beat it or I lose. And again, like Space Harrier 2, most of the time, because I've played this so much and I kind of know a lot of the foibles of this conversion, yeah, I tend to beat it most of the time. Damn good game. So many memories. Number 41, Castlevania Bloodlines, a game that came as a surprise back in the day. People kind of thought Castlevania was generally a Nintendo thing, at least here in the West, which perhaps in Japan and that it wasn't necessarily the case. But then Bloodlines comes out, or as it was known in the UK, Castlevania The New Generation. I think you'll agree Bloodlines is a much better title. It's a superb Castlevania game, what can you say? It's not necessarily beating like the likes of Super Castlevania 4, which is one of my favourite games ever made. But it'd certainly be, if I was to like make a top list of Castlevania games, Bloodlines would definitely make the top 5. It's one of the most excellent entries in the series for sure. Number 40, Jungle Strike, my favourite of all the Strike games. The main reason why this gets in so high, I think it's probably mainly to do with the first level. The first level of this game is amazing. It's in Washington DC, you've got all the landmarks and all of that, you've got so many houses, and you know what you can do if you really choose to do? You can just spend ages just blowing crap up and then returning to base and getting chewed out, and you get kind of all different things. Like if you choose to blow up the White House, you know, they'll say, well, you redecorated that Beirut style. Or, you know, there's the Lincoln Memorial, there's the Library of Congress. You can have so much fun just not completing this level and intentionally failing it. But then, when you actually get around to seriously playing it, that first level's damn good, and yeah, the rest of the game is pretty damn good too. This was, I think, the first Strike game where you actually had some multiple vehicles. There was a bit where you could have a tank, I think it was, in one bit, and there was a bike as well, and probably the main one that people remember because it was so hard to do. There's the bit where you had to go in like a jet fighter, which was really damn hard in the isometric form. But for me, it's definitely better of the Jungle Strike games. It's a bit more involved than Desert Strike was, and it's just flat out better than Urban, which was okay. Jungle Strike is the one to go for. Phantasy Star 2, the first RPG on the Mega Drive, and for a lot of people, perhaps the first RPG in the West, aside, I suppose, from the original Phantasy Star. Phantasy Star 2 is, perhaps for many RPG games, or for many RPG fans rather, it's not necessarily one that maybe has held up as well. It's a very hard game, it requires a lot of grinding. The dungeons are incredibly maze-like and perhaps not as memorable as the ones in the first game. Why do I love this game so much? I think just mainly because a lot of it, I really have a soft spot for its presentation. I'm not sure why. There's many RPGs that I can think of that are more impressive presentation-wise than Phantasy Star 2. But it's one of those things where it's just a little thing. It's like something about the music of the game, I suppose, just hits you right there. Is it the best RPG ever made? Not by a long chalk, but it certainly deserves props for being the first, one of the first ever RPGs to release, on the Western shores and kind of bringing that genre to prominence. So I think for that it needs a place. Number 38, Mercs. Mercs, while sadly the Mega Drive version is only single player, no multiplayer in this game, it is a great little sequel to the original Commando. The original Commando is a game that I dearly love as well, one of my favourite sort of early arcade games. Mercs is everything a sequel should be. It is generally more of the same, but you've got more weapons, you've got more enemies, and you've got a load more stuff to blow up. You've also got a load of vehicles in this one as well, sort of jeeps you can get, even sentry guns that you can kind of man for a bit and just shoot as much as you can. You've got the almighty Mega Crash as well. Sure, it's just a generic bomb that you'll find in any shooter, but it's called the Mega Crash, and for me that, makes it a bit better. And again, you've got a couple of different modes as well. You've got the classic arcade, you've got an original mode as well, which adds a different take onto your Mercs experience, gets you to try and get all the different soldiers and take them through and, beat the terrorists or whatever it is you have to do in this game. I don't remember the plot. I've never even looked at the plot. You're in some foreign location and you got to blow shit up because that's the American way, isn't it? That's what you got to do. It's Mercs. Sorted. Number 37, we have the original Streets of Rage. Streets of Rage, what can you say? Yuzo Koshiro's soundtrack, completely different to most anything else that was around at the time. It was Sega's answer to games like Final Fight, and it ended up being as good if not better. Sure, this original kind of is not as smooth as the later two games in the series were in many ways, but you can't knock the impact this game had. I mean, this was the game where it kind of came out not long after Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog was the game that really, for many, put the Mega Drive on the map. Streets of Rage was one of those games, one of a few games that proved that there was so much more to the Mega Drive than just having Sonic. There's a ton of great games here, and you need to have this system now. So for that, obviously, it deserves its place more, many times over. Number 36, Zero In. Now this is a weird one for me, because, I kind of remember when this became kind of famous, what was it, about 1999, 2000, as a bit of a meme, thanks to its quite a badly translated intro. But this was a game that I kind of knew before that, and I never really paid attention to the intro, because I used to have it. So I kind of just knew it more for being a really cool shoot-em-up, as opposed to it having this weird intro, and some people even thought it was a lousy game because of this intro, but then the actual game itself is superb. It's one of the best shooters on the Mega Drive. Again, like a lot of these tower plan games, you have some fine presentation. The soundtrack's kind of got a very poppy sort of tinge to it, sort of pop, sort of rock style things. You can imagine some sort of anime singing over it. The actual shooter itself, you've got a tractor pull, which is kind of the main gimmick, I suppose. At least you can pull a lot of the smaller enemies in and then throw them at everyone else. It's kind of a mazy shooter, kind of has that R-type thing going for it. There's a lot of caverns, there's a lot of difficult things to traverse. And again, it is tough when you get killed at various points and you're so slow that you can't actually defeat any of the enemies. But then that's something you kind of have with a lot of these games, isn't it? Zero In is great, silly intro or not. Cats, war is beginning, all your base and all of that. Main screen turn on. But, ignore all that. Great game. Rocket Knight Adventures, one of those games that a lot of people really do love as one of the best games on the system, one of the best platformers. I think it's damn great. I'm not going to disagree with that at all. yeah, I mean, what can you say? God, I say that so much for all these games. I'm like, what can you say? What can you say? I suppose that's one of the tough things about doing this without any kind of script. You play as Sparkster, you can dash around, there's all these cool little set pieces, there's tons of boss fights, like almost as many boss fights as you might find in your average Treasure game. A lot of them are here too. I think maybe perhaps a lot of it was the guys like Konami saying, oh, you know, you guys left the company, you Treasure guys left, well, we can do games like you do too. And I think there's a bit of that in a Rocket Knight, like kind of proving that, you know, we can do this stuff. And it's a damn good game. It's a shame that the sequel, Sparkster, wasn't that hot, but Rocket Knight Adventures certainly stands on its own 2 feet. 34, Y-Star, Ristar, however you want to call it. A game with a long history of obviously starting out as one of the potential things that Sonic could have been. It could have been this starry character with big extending hands and all of that. And then finally, right at the end of the Mega Drive's life, 1995, he gets a game of his own, and it's brilliant. One of the last great, you know, games that Sega themselves released for the system. You've got these big grabby hands, you've got sort of different routes through your levels. It is super cute, obviously, and super fun. You know, you can't beat this game. We're showing the expensive as well if you try and buy it these days. It wasn't a game that got much love back when it was released just because the Mega Drive was kind of coming to the end of its life as a platform. Nowadays it's one of those games that everyone wants, and it's available pretty much on any collection of the game's best that you're likely to find. Streets of Rage 3 is, conveniently enough, at number 33. This is, again, the interesting one of the original 3 Streets of Rage games. Normally the one that doesn't tend to get as much love for various reasons. A lot of that has to do with the Western version being way too hard, like ridiculously hard compared to the Japanese bare knuckle 3, which is definitely the version that I would recommend you try and get a hold of if you're going to get a hold of this game. Either way, you're going to be spending a lot of money. Some people don't particularly like the soundtrack, the Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima collaboration, which is very glitchy, a lot of very garbled music. A lot of people kind of find very full on. Some people love the soundtrack, some people hate it. I personally love it. And the action itself, the beat-em-up action, well, it's Streets of Rage. It's still tremendously high quality. There's a lot of technical things now. You can do the rolls. You have a sort of special move meter, which is actually quite handy. Weapons now have life bars, so you can't just get a lead pipe and run for a whole level with it like you perhaps could in the other 2 games. It has a lot of different things. It is certainly a challenge. There's multiple paths through the story. It's damn good. Perhaps not as memorable as the second game in the series, which obviously we're going to get to later, but I'm one of those who loves Streets of Rage 3 Bare Knuckle 3. I think it's more than worthy of being part of the series. Number 32, another game that I would say is quite underrated, Ys 3, Wise 3, however you pronounce Wise, Wanderers from Wise. This is, a lot of people would have called this the red-headed stepchild of the Ys series, because unlike most of the other Ys games, you know, it's not a top-down traditional RPG, it's a side-scrolling action RPG, and a lot of people perhaps didn't care for that, and some of the versions of this game, like the original version, and that I think on PC Engine or whatever, was not that great, a bit choppy and nasty. This Mega Drive version is probably the way to go about playing it. It's kind of like, I suppose, if we go all the way back to Kadosh, it's obviously a lot more RPG than that. That's kind of an arcade game with RPG elements, but it's of a similar vein, and I love this game. I always have since I played it like back in the early 2000s, I think. I probably played it on emulation. It wasn't a Sega Channel game, but I've always loved this one, and as of ever, I mean, I've said this for so many games, but especially for this one, as with all the Ys games, pretty much all the Nihon Falcom games in general, the music is top notch. Some of the best music you'll find on this whole list. I've always loved this game. I don't get why a lot of people really don't like it. I mean, sure, it's got a more modern version that you can play that's kind of more traditional Ys vein, Othin Felgana, but I have a lot of love for this original all the same. Dynamite Headdy is in at number 31. We're going back to the Treasure House. So this game was kind of the follow-up, I suppose, to Mcdonald's Treasureland Adventure. If you go back to this game, that has a lot of similar elements to this one. Treasure kind of had two teams. You had like the guys who'd work on games like Gunstar Heroes, Alien Soldier and all that, and then you had the guys who did McDonald's and Dynamite Headdy. You've got, as the name suggests, you've got a lot of different heads that you can go for. Heads that, you know, can blow things up. Heads that make you tiny. Heads that, you know, basically turn you into a gigantic moving hammer. All sorts of cool stuff like that. A game that I've loved since like the first time that I probably rented it out from Palace Video in Westcliff back in the day, like 1994 or whatever. A game that I adore. Another game that I really adore, as you might expect from all these games at the higher end of the list, number 30 is Atomic Runner. This would be my favourite game that Data East ever made. In specifically this conversion. The arcade game itself, Chelnov, bit controversial back in the day for its plot. Solid arcade game, but this conversion just seems to get everything about that original that was good and just kicks it up several notches. It is a game that's right in my wheelhouse. I mean, if you know my tastes, you know that I like simple action, intense, and well, this is a game where you're basically always running, you're always shooting at things, you're doing crazy jumps, somersaulting, doing lots of these stunts where you're kind of chaining jumps together, constantly jumping on things. This game is one of those things that has every sort of thing that I love about gaming in some aspect in it. So Atomic Runner was always going to be high on this list. If you haven't played this game, it's not that expensive. Do it. Get it, for sure. Number 29. There was always going to have to be one of the NHL games on here. I mean, I think as far as like sports games go, like specifically the ones that were for the Mega Drive, EA's NHL games are pretty much at the top of the park. I mean, if I discount stuff like Sensible Soccer, which I always consider more Amiga, the NHL games, they're more Mega Drive, they're the top. And of them, the one that I played the most was actually one of the later ones, NHL 97. This game wasn't really any different from NHL 96 that came before it, like literally just the rosters were updated, because this was right at the end of the Mega Drive's life. I think this was this the last one, or was there an NHL 98? I think there might have been an NHL 98 on the Mega Drive. This one, 97, is all the stuff you love about the other NHL games, in that it's so fast-paced, you can smash everybody with brutal body checks, score fantastic goals with your one-timers, all those cool sorts of things are there. It's simple, it's delicious. It's a lovely little game. You know, all the NHL games were great, and this is no exception. Number 28, Grenada. Grenada is my favourite game by Wolf Team. We've had a lot of their games here. We've had El Viento, we've had Arcus Odyssey, we've had Final Zone. Grenada is the top banana. Top-down arcade action, you control this tank, you move along fast, you've got a rapid shot, you've got a super shot, you've got strafes, you have to destroy various enemies, kind of like Final Zone, until you destroy all of them and then you fight a boss. Simple enough action, some great set pieces. The second level in particular of this game, where you're on top of this massive plane and just shooting all sorts of things, always goes down as one of the most memorable single levels in any Mega Drive game for me, and for that alone it would get a place higher, but the rest of the game is pretty damn good too. One of those games where it's so underrated, and if you haven't played it, you gotta. Number 27, this is another entry that won't come as a surprise to anyone who knows my tastes. Alien 3 is on here. Alien 3 is not necessarily a game you would particularly think could have much chance of being good. I mean, it's a licensed game of a pretty average movie, but then you have this cool Matt Furniss soundtrack, and you've got this game that's really kinda creepy in many ways. It bears very little relation to the actual movie, seeing as there's lots of aliens in it. Alien 3 only had one alien, hence the title. But it's got such an atmosphere to it. I think it's just the soundtrack, the general darkness of it. You've got very challenging maze-like stages and a very stingy time limit in most of the levels. It's hard. Some people do prefer the SNES game as well, and that is not a bad game, I have to say, but for me, Alien 3 on the Mega Drive is always going to be that little bit better. A huge sentimental favourite. Number 26 It doesn't get much more famous than Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog, what can you say about Sonic the Hedgehog? It needs no introduction. Again, this is one of those games that, it was the game that set up the Mega Drive, you know, this was the one that did it, the one that established it as a console. It's Sonic. It was the first game that I played on my Mega Drive, as was the case with a lot of people. It was my pack-in title. I got my Mega Drive in late 91, and this was the game. And it was all the rage back then, and rightly so. It still more than holds up today, I think. The only thing I suppose that I can say is that I'm one of the few who actually likes the special stage in Sonic 1, believe it or not. Most people hate that these days. I really enjoy that special stage. Other than that, well, the rest of the game, it's Sonic. It's great. Go figure. Next up, we have Mega Turrican. Personally, I think this has kind of grown over the years to become my favourite of the Turrican games. Mega Turrican, also known as Turrican 3 if you play it on the Amiga or what have you. Turrican 3, I suppose, is more straight ahead than the other Turrican games. The levels are a bit more linear in this one. The soundtrack for this game, the Chris Hallsbeck soundtrack, particularly First Level Song Factory Action, is my all-time favourite of all the Turrican songs, which is saying a lot because those soundtracks are incredible. Graphics, superb as you would expect. You know, all the technical quality stuff it goes without saying that from Factor 5, it's superb. And the gameplay itself, for me, this gameplay just has a bit more of an edge over the likes of Turrican 2 or the original. Maybe it's because I'm a bit better at this game, I don't know. And obviously you have all the other Turrican things, you know, you can roll, you can use your power lines. You've also got a grappling hook in this game, which is the sort of different thing that has. And, you know, all your different shots and what have you. It's classic Turrican action, it goes without saying that it's damn good. Number 24, my favourite shooter on the Mega Drive, Fire Shark. Why is Fire Shark my favourite compared to perhaps other more impressive shooters like, say, Thunder Force or Elemental Master? I mean, it is a much more straight-ahead, classic, arcadey sort of game. I'm not sure how I can really answer that. There's a lot of these tower plan shooters, the likes of Twin Hawk or Hellfire, that are pretty generic. Truxton, I suppose, is another. They all kind of feature the same things, you know, you got your power-ups, you got your spray weapon, you got your big death ray laser weapon. Fire Shark has all of those things and just ends up being more than the sum of its parts, I suppose, for me. There's something about the high-octane music and presentation, or the cute little Easter eggs that you find, especially when you begin a stage, like you have that plane that smashes into a wall, like a plane that tries to take off. Hey, let me go with you, Mr. Fire Shark, and then just crashes. I don't know, it's just everything to me that a classic old school shoot 'em up should be. I can't explain why it's better than something like Truxton. I just feel that it is. I just feel that it's the best. It's my favourite. Most people probably wouldn't pick Fire Shark as their best Mega Drive shooter. I mean, there's so many good shoot 'em ups on the Mega Drive. But for me, this one is mine. And I suppose that's the thing with a list like this. That's the personality that comes through. So yeah, I love Fire Shark dearly. Number 23, I think, is perhaps a much more famous game. It's Aladdin. Aladdin is one of those games that really shouldn't be as good as it is, I think, especially if you know the story behind it. You know that there was one Aladdin game that was basically scrapped, and then a whole different team of people had to do this game in collaboration with Disney in a few months, like from beginning to end, virtually from scratch. They had to do this game. Somehow it becomes this superb platformer with brilliant animation that at the time you played this game you thought, shit, this is almost exactly like the movie, and how quality the animation was. There's lots of cool creative touches in the stages. You've got a fun little Tommy Tallarico soundtrack. Like, with the amount of time that this game took to make, there's no way it should have been good. It should have been terrible. And yet, what ended up coming out was, I do believe, the best-selling game on the Mega Drive, aside from the Sonic titles. It was that damn good. And far better than Capcom's SNES game. I'll just stand by that automatically. This game is by far the more memorable title. It's superb. A classic Mega Drive game has to be on this list. At number 22, we have Comix Zone. Comix Zone, for years, This was a game like Rystar that was released right at the end of the Mega Drive's life, so when it was released it didn't get any love at all. For years people would say there's this brilliant Mega Drive game that's so underrated, it's called Comix Zone, and people have said it so much for so many years, since 1995 when it was released. Nowadays it can't really be called underrated. I think most people would agree that Comix Zone is one of the more original and one of the better games to ever be released on the system. The premise itself isn't even one that's been emulated that much since. That's really kind of gone full on into that comic strip style where you actually go in between frames. The actual action itself, it's a side-on game, almost like an Altered Beast kind of thing, but the actual moves that you have to do and the fights that you have with enemies are so much more exciting than that game. There's little bitty puzzles that you've got to do on the way, and there's a great narrative drive about it. It's hard as balls, you only get 1 life per continue, and if you die in the first level you just die, but it works. It really does work. The presentation is one thing that people probably remember about it more than anything else. The actual game itself is great too. Number 21, another side-scrolling classic, Alesia Dragoon. Alesia Dragoon, again, a game that certainly in later years has become known as one of the Mega Drive's best. Great music, great presentation. Gameplay itself for this one, you have a weapon that's forever maximum charged, but the more you use it, the more it goes down, and you kind of have to wait for it to go back up again. You got loads of familiars that can help you. You have, again, like a lot of these games, a lot of great action set pieces. Again, it's one of those games, it's like Atomic Runner. This is a game that's right in my wheelhouse. This is exactly the sort of game that I love. You know, if you know me, you know that Alesia Dragoon is always going to be a game that features highly on a list like this. So, no surprise, it's right here just outside the top 20. Play this game if you haven't. It's still not that expensive for some reason. Number 20, Gauntlet 4. Gauntlet 4. Gauntlet 4 is still one of the very best updates on a classic arcade game that you'll find. One of the best packages, labours of love. Again, a game with a great story behind it. A game that pretty much set up a whole studio. Oh god, who did it set up? M3 was set up by Gauntlet 4. This was their first game, and obviously they're known for so many brilliant retro updates of retro games. This was their first. Obviously you've got the classic arcade game here, which is great. You've got other little things too. You've got cool record modes, you've got cool battle modes. You've even got a big old quest mode that basically makes Gauntlet as much as it can into a proper action RPG style game, a proper dungeon crawler. Sure, the speech samples are terrible. The classic Gauntlet speech samples, they're really not good quality here. But I can forgive that when it has some of the best music on the whole system. This is the way that you present a classic arcade game. It's fantastic. Obviously in the top 20. Number 19, Zombies Ate My Neighbours. A game published by Konami but developed by LucasArts. One of their few games that wasn't a point-and-click game. Obviously they're more familiar with point-and-click games, so you might wonder just what a sort of action game by LucasArts would going to be like. This ends up being bloody brilliant. You have to rescue various hostages before they get killed by the various zombies, go figure, that are walking around. You've got all these crazy little enemies. You've got so many homages and tributes to endless B movies. You have a 50-foot baby as a boss for one of your levels. You have other references to movies like Friday the 13th, Child's Play, Lem. There's so much here to love, like, not just if you're like a B-movie, sci-fi, horror fan, but if you love games in general, you got to play Zombies Ate My Neighbours. I only wish that in the UK, you know, it was actually called Zombies Ate My Neighbours, which is such a good title. Over here it was just called Zombies, which isn't exactly as good a title. It's brilliant regardless of what it's called. At number 18 we have Pirates Gold. Pirates is obviously a very famous computer game. There's many computer buds that will have obviously played this on so many different systems. I personally played it on the Mega Drive a lot, and it actually works kind of well for the Mega Drive. I mean, sure, you know, you don't have the mouse control over, but I find things like the sword fighting and all of that a lot easier to do on this version than on other versions. Pirates as a game, if you've played it, you know how ridiculously addictive it is. You take on the life of a pirate, you try and find buried treasure, get into all sorts of scraps with different ships, go in search of the silver train, try and find your lost family, marry a decent girl. You act as a privateer for some and a flat out pirate for others. You can choose whatever you want to do, and every voyage that you take, something different's going to happen. It's a game that you can play for hours, and I have done, so obviously it's on the list. And I love the update version as well, but this more original version, yeah, love this too. Just a great game no matter what you play it on. Game Ground, number 17. I have been so enthusiastic about this game, perhaps more times than I care to remember. I think it's one of the most unique and brilliant arcade style games ever made. Some people, you know, really don't get it. They kind of figure out what you have to do, like maybe they try and get all the people to the end of the stage rather than just trying to kill everybody and using the strategy that's required to actually get that going. But once you kind of figure it out, like how to go, everything just clicks about this game, and it's wonderful. It has a great premise. You know, you have sort of this computer simulation of war through the ages. So you've got Vietnam soldiers taking on Stone Age cavemen or like Vikings and all that. So as you kind of go through from like the way past to the sci-fi future, and you actually defeat the computer itself. Far from just being a straight-ahead top-down shooter, there's a lot of strategy involved. You can really kind of cruise through this game as long as you know like who's best for what, because everyone's got a different function. Some people are utterly useless in one situation, but then in a completely different situation they're indispensable. And it's so easy for everything to just go flat out wrong. And then when everything does go on, you have a lot of fun just, right, how can I actually try and sort this out and recover the situation? It's a game that's just always on a knife edge. It's one of the best games of its type, and I'll happily stand by that. It's a game that I wish would get some sort of update, because I'm not sure how many games have really tried to do something like Game Ground did since. Gunstar Heroes, number 16, another one of those kind of obvious games. This sort of has to be on here, but that's no real big deal because it's amazing. It's Treasure's best game. I mean, what can you say about it? Bosses are plenty, great graphics are plenty, music are plenty, choose your stages. You know, you've got the 7 Force, you've got the dice level, which everyone hates. You've got all these brilliant little things. It's so fun, like if you're playing it with a second player. Everything about this game is great. I'm not necessarily a fan of all of Treasure's games. You'll notice that Alien Soldier isn't on here because I don't particularly like that one. Or like Crusader, but then no one likes that one. But this is a game that everything that Treasure was trying to do as a studio, this is the game that sums them up, their quintessential title. It's obviously brilliant. Number 15, Beyond Oasis. Again, another game that had a completely nonsensical title here in the UK. This game was called The Story of Four in the UK or Europe, which makes no sense because there's nothing Nordic at all about it. You play as a guy named Ali, and it's a lot more Middle Eastern, I suppose, in its look. A great little action RPG, very Zelda-esque obviously, although the graphics are brilliantly cartoonish. You've also got a soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro. Not necessarily his best soundtrack, although it's fun to pick out all the sound effects that were recycled from the Streets of Rage series in this game. There's tons of them. I think most of the sound effects are stuff that's in Streets of Rage as well. Great game. Great little action RPG, one of the most fun ones of its type. The best that you could get probably on the Mega Drive, although I have to confess to not having played much of a Crusader of Senti, so that's why that's not on the list. Beyond Oasis though, one of my favourites, a great Sega Channel game. Speaking of great Sega Channel games, we have Aerobiz Supersonic. This is a game by Curry, and it's basically like nothing else on the list. This is one of Curry's executive simulators. In Aerobiz Supersonic, you run an airline, and you have to face off against these other airlines to try and be the #1 airline in the world. It doesn't exactly sound like the most exciting game, but there is something about this game. Is it just like the uniqueness of the premise in that I can not think of many other airline management games out there? Or is it just because it plays so well? I mean, I remember playing this game like back on the Sega Channel, like in 1997. And because, you know, when you get the Sega Channel and you get the games for them, obviously you're going to play all of them. And because otherwise it was a game that I'd have probably never looked at. I'd have thought, I'm not going to play that shit. But then I played it and it was like, wow, this is actually really addictive and impulsive, like trying to set up the best routes and then tinkering them and getting all your regional hubs together, and definitely having that competition as well with the other airlines and wanting to be the best every quarter. There's a lot of fun to be had here. It may not look like the most fun title, but I can assure you it is. Trust me on this one. Play Erebus Supersonic if you haven't and see how you get on with it. Number 13, ToeJam and Earl. Like Erebus Supersonic, this is a game that's quite indescribable. There's almost nothing like ToeJam and Earl. You have different presents that you need to get. You need to collect the ship pieces so you can get back home from this crazy multi-tiered planet called Earth, apparently. There's all these weird Earthlings, there's all this 90s tude and hip-hoppy type stuff. There's so much things about ToeJam and Earl that no one really tried to do before or since, and the game itself is amazing. Like, it is one of those games that I think it's probably one of the best multiplayer games, certainly. I mean, it's fun enough in single player, but you add a second player to this and you have an amazing cooperative experience. I mean, that's one thing that always sticks out in my mind. Me and one of my friends, we played this game for hours whenever we do. Lovely, brilliant game. Indescribably amazing. Number 12, Ghouls and Ghosts. This is a game that I think I've grown to love a hell of a lot more than I used to back in the day. Not that I always didn't used to really enjoy Ghouls and Ghosts, but now it's just always been one of those games that I always come to. Perhaps part of that is because it's not necessarily the hardest game ever and I'm not that good at playing games. I mean, sure, the actual game itself is difficult, but you do get infinite continues and can start pretty much back where you were when you died. So there's that, but I don't know, there's just something about Ghouls and Ghosts that for me makes it so much better than either Ghosts and Goblins or the SNES Super Ghouls and Ghosts game. And again, this is one of those games that deserves credit for being one of the great 16-bit games from the early Mega Drive period, much like Castle of Illusion, Revenge of Shinobi, all that lot. This was another one of, those you can't do this on Nintendo moments, because this is just so much better. I mean, people tried to do it on the 8-bits. There's a terrible Spectrum version of this game if you're interested in playing that. But no, Ghouls and Ghosts is... I have very fond memories of that, and it's not just the fond memories, it's when I play this I seem to have more fun with it every time, just kind of obviously continuing a lot because I'm not that good at the game, but I just always want to keep playing it whenever I do. Another Curry classic, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 3. Now this is of course one of the series that Curry are most known for. Obviously they're most known for Dynasty Warriors, which is about the same period in history, but this is of course the big strategy game adaptation of the old classic book based on the period, the Three Kingdoms period of Chinese history. Again, this was a game that I played on the Sega channel back in the day, and again, it's not exactly a game that I would have ever thought of playing if I hadn't had the Sega channel and hadn't gone through all those games. But then I play this game and it's like, wow, I love this. You've got obviously the opportunity to cultivate your territories, but then obviously you have to expand and gradually try and take over all of China. You've got all the famous names. You've got Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Dong Zhuo, and all that. You start off small. I mean, I tend to always start off with Cao Cao in the first period. That's generally how I like to play it. But, I mean, you can also change history if you want. You can create a new officer to play the game. You can have a whole fictional mode where things just kind of tend to happen as they may rather than happen as they did historically. It is so much in depth, and then when you actually get to the battle side of things, you do have this big, grand strategy style of things. It's a game that really somehow manages to immerse me, even though it's like a console game on the computer, and I can't imagine it being the most easiest game to get into, like a lot of these Curry historical simulations, but for me it's easily the best of them, and something about me hooked it when I first played it, and it's never stopped hooking me since then. My favourite game of Curry's. So we're into the top 10, and our top 10 starts with Splatterhouse 2. Weirdly, and this is kind of crazy, I remember Splatterhouse 2 back in the day not getting that much love from magazines, and it always seemed to be that people preferred Splatterhouse 3 when that came out. Personally, I think Splatterhouse 2 is a much better game than that one. This is a classic horror-themed side-scroller. You've got, the Jason-style mask, you've got all the glorious graphic nature of it. I mean, there's no blood per se, but you know, you get a pipe and you smash these zombies against the wall. You've got, you know, the eyeballs popping out, the belly bursting open, all these lovely sights. And the game itself is just amazing in my opinion. It's got just the right level of difficulty, I think, for a game like this. And it just, everything about it works so well. And yeah, I think back in the day this was getting scores of like 60% in the magazines. I can't imagine why. Maybe it was just because there were so many games like this one around the time, or so many side-scrolling action games. This one just kind of got lost in the peloton. Nowadays it's stuck out on its own merits. I think most people say, you know, this game is brilliant, and it is one of my favourites, always has been. Number 9, we have DJ Slope's favourite game of all time, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. For many, this is the absolute pinnacle of the Mega Drive, and I certainly get that, especially when, you know, you put the original Sonic 3 together with Sonic and Knuckles and you get this huge 16-bit platformer, and there's so many great moments in it. Yeah, I mean, I can't knock it at all. There's obviously plenty of good reasons why it's number 9. It isn't actually my favourite Sonic game, that's going to be coming up in a bit. But this is, I mean, I understand anyone who says that this is the best game on the Mega Drive. I personally don't agree. I think there's a few that just about edge it for me, but yeah, I mean, it is a classic. It is one of the best 16-bit platformers from all the systems. There's no denying it. It's just a shame about things like the Sandopolis zone. I think the reason why perhaps I prefer Sonic 2 is maybe this game, certainly some of the zones are perhaps just a bit too big. You know, you have things like the Carnival Night or the Marble Garden or the Sandopolis that you kind of think maybe these outstay their welcome a bit. But it is a wonderful journey. There's no doubt about that. At number 8, we have Flashback. For me, this game has always been the king of what they call, I suppose, the cinematic platformers. You start off, you know, knowing nothing in this weird jungle and trying to get your bearings, and then you go on a journey that takes you all the way from the moon to Earth to an alien ship. There's a game show where you get a passport, or you get your ticket to wherever, ticket back to Earth. There's all these different aspects to it. You know, you have the more realistic movement, and you have all these different puzzles that you can do. You have that famous jump at the start of level 2 that a lot of people couldn't figure out how to do. I kind of had to wait for a guide on that one to see how the hell do you do this jump. All that sort of thing. It is a beautiful atmospheric adventure. For me, the best game in like the genre, the same genre of like Prince of Persia, Blackthorn, Another World, all of that sort of thing. It's the top dog. I love Flashback to dearly. Number 7, a game that is so in my wheelhouse it's not even funny. It's Strider. It is, again, it's another classic 16-bit game. The first 8 mega power cartridge. You know what sort of things I love already. You know I love quick fire action. You know I love massive set pieces, and this game has a million of them. It's got the big Ouroboros boss. It's got the bit where you run down the hill and then do that massive leap while everything's blowing up around you. It's got climbing on walls. It's got that bit where you go upside down. It's got the bit where you face the core of the battleship Balog. It's got the entire last level, which combines all of these things in one stupidly difficult package. It's one of the best games ever made, which is why it's here. There's no doubt about that. I'm not sure I really need to say much more. This is the pinnacle of action gaming, and I wish beyond wish that the recent Strider update had taken cues from this game and not that fucking shite NES game that it decided to take cues off instead. Like, I just wish that that new Strider had been more like this game. This is great. And it's certainly a lot better than Strider 2, that's for sure. Number 6, the pinnacle of the Sega Channel games. I would have never played this game without it, because it never got released in the UK. Shadowrun. Shadowrun, of course, there's 2 different Shadowrun games back in the day. There was the SNES one that was more of a typical like, adventure RPG. Shadow 1 on the Mega Drive is more free roaming, you know. A lot of it is spent taking on various jobs, actually being a Shadow Runner, going to Mr. Johnson's, doing things, partnering up with other Shadow Runners, going into the Matrix and doing that sort of game within a game thing where you hack into systems and download all the data files you can. And you have a sort of great little plot that you gradually go through, you know. You make those big runs against Renwaku and all that lot and gradually advance this plot. The plot itself is very good aside from a kind of lousy ending, but the main pull of this game is the open-ended nature of it, the open world side of things. That's what I loved about this one, and when this came on the Sega channel, I was addicted. Like, for that month, this was pretty much the only game that I played. So yeah, money well spent for me on that month. I've loved this game ever since then. For a long time it was my favourite RPG on the system until I played the one that most people agree is the best RPG on the system. Wonderful game. So many good memories. So, top 5. Naturally the top 5 starts with Shinobi 3. I remember the first time I played this game, I was on a job with me dad and we used to go around people's houses while he tried to sell windows and whatever. And so I was stuck with the other kid in the house. He had Shinobi 3 and it's like, hey, let's play this. And I just remember being blown away. Like, we just kind of took turns playing, even though it was a one-player game, obviously. And I just remember thinking, oh my lord, this game is good. And it was one of those games that after that, it's like, I kind of had to have it. It is the pinnacle of sort of action side-scrollers on the system. So many different sort of cool bits again. It's got all those stunts that I like. It's got riding on horseback. It's got the surfing. It's got the soundtrack. But at the main, even regardless of all those flashy stunts and everything, just the core of the game is perfect. Like, it was all leading up to this. Like, you had the original, then you had Revenge, and you had Shadow Dance. All those 3 games were great, but then you put them all together and you end up with this amazing game. It is rightly now, I think. Again, I don't think it was a game that got a massive amount of attention when it was released first off. Now I think it's pretty much regarded as the best steak on the steer. This is as good as you're going to get action-wise on the system with a side-scroller. It is on its own for that sort of thing. So yeah. Number 4, World of Illusion. This is kind of the inverse of Shinobi 3. Again, it's a side-scrolling game, but whereas Shinobi 3 is just super intense at every level, this is just relaxing. This is just utterly relaxing, classic platforming bliss. Like, World of Illusion isn't even necessarily that much more impressive than Castle of Illusion is, but there's just something about its journey. It may be kind of an easy game. I mean, it is an easy game. This is a game that you can complete pretty much every time you try and probably only lose a couple of lives, if that. But every little frame, it's got that, for me it's like one of the best examples of just classic 16-bit art, like in the graphics. Everything, every sort of little bit just has another flourish about it. Like, there's so much imagination in the whole game. It just kicks things up a notch from the already really solid like imagination that went into Castle of Illusion. I wish this kind of also got a 3D update, like a modern update like that game did, because for me it's amazing. It's better, and it certainly was needed after the horror that was Fantasia. Like, it's like, as bad as that game was, it's like, wow, we need to make something that's really good, and they did. They made World of Illusion, which for me is just beautiful. It is a game that, it's a perfect like 30 minutes sort of platform fun. Like, have to play it. You just have to play it if you haven't. It is so chilled. So our top 3, naturally we've got 3 big guns to finish, and it doesn't get much bigger at number 3 than Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, just for me, I mean, I think people probably generally prefer Sonic 3 and Knuckles these days, and I get that. Sonic 2 for me, though, is just the total package, and it does not outstay its welcome in the same way that, for me, Sonic 3 and Knuckles in some parts does. It's, again, it's kind of like, I suppose I said it just now about World of Illusion. It's a perfect, like, 40 or so minutes of gaming. I can't think of a problem that I have with any of the zones in this game or anything like that. And at its best, you know, the likes of Casino Night, Oil Ocean, Chemical Plant, which is my favourite Sonic zone ever, the Wind Fortress, and all of that sort of thing. It is just something else. I mean, it's one of those games that as soon as I got it, I had to play it to the finish. Love it. And for me, it's the best Sonic game. and it always will be the best Sonic game. I mean, I certainly can't see anything new taking that prize these days. So our top 2, there's only going to be 2 games left in it. I think you know what those 2 are. And our second game, our runner-up, Phantasy Star 4. This is actually a game that I only played through, like, completely quite recently. It was only like a couple of years ago that I actually played through this in full. Because before then I would have always said that my favourite Mega Drive RPG was Shadowrun. Now that I've played this through, yeah, this is the best. I mean, for me, it's the best 16-bit RPG. I would always pick it. Maybe that's because of my instinctive Mega Drive bias, but I would always pick this over the big SNES RPGs, your Chrono Triggers and Final Fantasies and whatever. This, for me, is just the one. The story is greatly affecting and quite personally has a big personal thing for me as well. Music, like all the Phantasy Star games, utterly top notch. The actual mechanics of the RPG are so fun to work with, especially when you can kind of get all the combo moves together, get all your macros up. You've got the vehicle sections. It's just fascinating as a title, and I don't think there's only one RPG that I like more than this, and that's obviously Final Fantasy VII. It is, yeah, for me it's the top 16-bit RPG. There ain't that many RPGs on the Mega Drive, especially not when compared to the SNES, but the ones that are there, the top ones, are as good as any, if not bad. And for me, Phantasy Star 4 is the best. And so that leaves the number 1, and I think that you all know that it's obviously Shaq Fu. No, just kidding. It is, of course, Streets of Rage 2. Now, when I did the top 100 games of all time list, I actually ended up ranking Phantasy Star 4 ahead of Streets of Rage 2, but it is a case where these 2 games are so close together that on any given day, one of these could make it. Last time it was Phantasy Star 4, this time it's Streets of Rage 2. What can I say? This is the perfect beat-em-up. It is flawless. The soundtrack, every single level, how it all comes together, every single thing just comes together like a different scene, a whole different chapter. There's never any part of this game that's boring. Like when you get, to the time when you want to get on the elevator and Expander kicks in, or you get that beautiful level that's in the theme park, you go from the pirate ship to the ghost house, all like the sort of different enemies and just how iconic they are in my mind, and all the different moves that you could do. Like Streets of Rage 1 was such a good game, but when Streets of Rage 2 came out, to be honest, Streets of Rage 2 did kind of blow Streets of Rage 1 away, it has to be said. Everything about this game has a dear place in my heart, from, the brilliant soundtrack, which to me is the best that's ever been released on the Mega Drive, to the beautiful graphics and all the little touches that you have in every single stage. To me, this game basically represents everything that made the Mega Drive good. And even though if I had to put when I put a generic all-time multi-platform list together, Phantasy Star 4 might beat it. When it comes to putting a specific list for the Mega Drive together, to me really there is no question that Streets of Rage 2 is at the top, because for me, even ahead of all the Sonic games, Streets of Rage 2 is the definitive title for the Mega Drive. It is if there was one title that I had to pick, if I had the Desert Island scenario, the cliche Desert Island, I have a Mega Drive and one game, there's no question. Streets of Rage 2 has to be. And so for that reason, that's why it's number 1. So, I hope you've enjoyed this top 100 list of Mega Drive games. If there's games that you haven't played on this list, then I heartily recommend that you do so. It's certainly been a great deal of fun for me revisiting a lot of these games, some of them for the first time in quite a while, some of them are games that I still play on the regular, because I'll always love the Mega Drive and I'll always keep playing the system because it is my favourite, and not just for the nostalgic reason of it being the system of those great formative years when I was growing up, just because there's just something about the sleek black box that just hits you right there, and just the games just have their own. They just stand on their own, more perhaps than games on any other console. So yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Perhaps I shall have some more platform-specific top 100s coming up. Maybe one for the Spectrum. Maybe one that's going to be more modern and concentrates on my Steam library. PlayStation as well, possibly. There's plenty of things on the horizon on this front, so hopefully you like this one, and hopefully I'll see you again for something else. Bye for now. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, then hey, why don't you like it and subscribe and have a look at my social media. Follow me on Twitter or Facebook or wherever the social media things I have on there are. Or, if you really want to get where the action is, you could get to my Patreon and join this list of awesome people here. Alexa Jones-Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Asobi Kwan DX, Brian Hennigar, Chris Pode, Cody Spooner, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zalior Rimwan Sutter, Daniel Briggs, Dave Cork, David Rose, Dinty76538, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Geordie Alex, Ian Roberts, James Brown, Jason Stevens, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Lee Norris, Lukas Kuligovsky, Mateus Gramzov, Martin Pataki, Potter Margel, Renbimon, Rusty Kelly, Samir Alamar, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Tim Wald, Wilbo, Yerka Operator, and Zach Roach, and all the rest of the community. Thank you, and goodbye.